Welcome back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. Squirrel, you sent me a link to an article, as you often do, and we thought it'd be good to talk about it. Why did you think it'd be good to talk about this article in particular?
Well, Jeffrey, what I'd like to think about instead is why you asked me that question, because often, sort of the source of the article isn't the most important thing. It's what's most interesting to you. So what was interesting to you about the article?
Oh, okay. Well, the article was about that. I thought it'd be useful to our listeners because it is giving advice that when someone asks you a question and it's in a sort of product context, that you're best off not necessarily just directly answering it. There's a lot to learn from the context rather than jumping into an answer, and you might be missing the bigger win here, learning more about what your product could or should be.
And if listeners were paying close attention, I just demonstrated that because Jeffrey asked me a question that had an assumption in it, which was that I had some purpose in sharing the article. In fact, I hadn't actually read the article. I just
Oh,
said, this looks like something that Jeffrey and I would enjoy talking about. Its title seems to fit, and I sent it to you. And by questioning the assumption, I actually learned more about the article. So this sounds like I was right. This is a very valuable article, and we should definitely talk about it. But the point of it is you shouldn't necessarily, I would generalize it slightly in a way that Alan Weiss would say, which is don't accept the underlying assumption of the question. And an example where that comes up often is when I'm selling my services or I'm discussing what I might do for a client. And the client says, we'd like you to come and run a workshop. And do you think you could run it? How about Thursday? And my
yeah.
answer is not, here's my fee for running a workshop. My answer is, why do you want a workshop? What outcome are you going to get from it? And often I find out that the workshop isn't the last thing that they actually need.
Yeah, that's it's surprisingly common in my experience as well. And I think also in this sort of case where it's more the article is more product specific, and I agree with you, it's more general. And I think it goes against a lot of people's natural habits though, because they think the most helpful thing to do is to answer the question that's being asked as they understand it. And I think the article does a good job, and of course, link in the show notes as always, explaining, giving you a couple of reasons why that might not be a good idea. And in along the way, it provides some good examples about why it might be a mistake. And one of this is someone might be asking a question that has sort of a mistaken assumption of even what the product is or the way the product is architected, designed. So they're kind of like, how do I do this thing that you really shouldn't be doing in the product? Um, and that's something that I think is very common. And I think that's your example with can you come do this workshop is the consulting equivalent to that. But what got me more excited about it is that it talks about there are actually higher value things where you might learn about things that your product should do. Or in between, that there's something your product does and it's what they're trying to accomplish, but your product UI is hiding that. And I know that as we were getting ready to record this podcast, I think you experienced some of that. Like
Oh,
the
yes.
simple question of how do I, start the recording?
That turned out to be remarkably difficult. We're switching because a company called Descript bought the company we used to use, Squadcast. And so I said, hey, we should use the one that's actually being supported, that's not being sunsetted by the purchaser. So, yeah, Jeffrey, let's switch. And I said, good. What I'll do first is I'll find the record podcast button. And the question I would have asked the help desk, which they might not want to answer, is where is the record podcast button? It turns out there are three different record buttons. They're in different places and they all mean different things to start with. None of them seem to be well set up for recording a podcast. And I had to try about 7 different things before I could find how to create a room and invite Jeffrey to the room and then actually start recording. So the underlying thinking behind Descript is clearly different from Squadcast, which was specific for podcasts. And maybe I'll get used to that, or maybe I'll find something else for us to record on. But I really had a fundamental misunderstanding of how the thing works. I actually still have it because I don't know what a room is. But apparently I need a room before I can record a podcast. I haven't worked out why. The point is that my questions to the help desk, had I asked any instead of just randomly clicking record buttons until one worked, would have been very confusing. And had they answered, it would not have helped me because my question is, how do I start a podcast? And the answer is, Squirrel, you're thinking about that wrong. A common thing that I tend to use for this comes from, I learned it from Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel Escher Bach book, but it's an old Zen notion. It's the answer is sometimes mu, M-U, and that unasks the question. It says, you have asked the wrong question. The answer to this will not help you. And so I wish I had known that my questions I was frantically asking with only a few four-letter words were worthy of being unasked.
And the thing here, what resonates with me in part is I've often talked with people on product teams about the kind of experience you're having, and because it's very easy as say the designer or the engineer to blame the quote unquote stupid user. Like, isn't it obvious? Like, you just push the button. How hard could it be? And often the problem is that the people who are making the product have very deeply internalized the model, the mental model that's behind the product. And for them, certain things are utterly transparent. And it's incredibly valuable to get someone who's unfamiliar with the products to spend some time with it. And this is why doing user testing and user focus groups and watching people behind a mirror and things like that, in the old days and these days, watching session recordings can be so helpful, because you start to learn, the challenges that your users have in navigating it, so that even if you have a solution for what the user is trying to do, then you can learn that you're not making it very apparent to them. So that's a crucial thing for designers to learn, that their mental model is not inherently the one that the users do have or even should have. And in particular, and you can go further, it's quite normal that your longtime users have developed a mental model for your product that is not the same as yours. Even though they're successfully using the product, they actually have a different model, and the match between their model and your product are good enough. But learning what their real mental model is can be super valuable. And I think that leads me to the third thing that the author was talking about, which is sometimes in these conversations, when you understand what people are trying to do, you learn that your product should be a different thing entirely, or you're learning that it's missing, usually that there's some gap that it's missing. But the different thing entirely is what got me very excited, because it reminded me of our friend Gojko has a book called Lizard Optimization, based on the Lizardmen quotient, which is to say there's always some outliers in a population that are doing very strange things, and that you can actually learn a lot from them. And in his case,
so wait, Jeffrey, we got to explain to our listeners, what the heck is the Lizardman quotient, and why is it called that?
The Lizardman quotient has to do with something that comes up in public polling, and if you ask people, who you're going to vote for, something like that, or there's a certain number of people who are going to vote for lizardmen, or who believe that lizardmen are secretly running the world, and it's a fairly fixed percentage of people who will come up with this, and that lizardman quotient is something that comes around 4%. Believe that lizardmen are running the earth.
Excellent.
So
now, I don't think we're saying that you necessarily should build your product for people who believe in alien beings from another dimension who are running the planet. Those people probably can't use your product very well, whatever your product is. But I think what Gojko is saying, if I understand it right, is there are some people who believe equally weird stuff about your product, and it's actually valuable to listen to them.
Yeah,
now,
that's
why
right.
is it useful to listen to them if they believe something as crazy as the equivalent of Lizardmen about your product?
Well, it really comes from people who are using your product in a very different way, in a far outlier way. And I think in the example that Gojko had in mind, he had a service that I believe was creating like a transcript that would go. It was like an animation. You'd upload slides and speaking notes, and it would create an animated version with a voiceover. And he found some strange users were uploading blank slides, and he just thought there was something wrong at
Which would
first with
mean
his.
they would get no animation, right? It would animate white space, and animated white space is extremely boring.
That's right. And so he thought that there was something wrong with his product first. His instrumentation told him this was happening. So he thought, well, we must be rendering something wrong. Until it took him a while to realize actually that what was happening was that the slides being uploaded were blank, because it turned out what they really wanted was just the audio, and that it turned out became an entirely different product. That one was many times larger than what he was originally doing. So the ability to generate the audio tracks, and that was his
And just
point,
stop and
was
think
that
about that for a second. Stop and think about that, listeners, at least, because it just struck me. There was a group of users who actively hated and disliked and didn't want a part of Gojko's product, but they loved another part of Gojko's product. And that reminds me of the origin of the photo website Flickr. Jeffrey, do you know that origin?
I think it's one of those cases of the person trying to make a game and ended up
Yes.
making a product by mistake.
Yeah. People were ignoring the game, which involved sort of monsters fighting each other, and they were uploading pictures, which were not monsters, to go on the cards, which they weren't using as cards. But what they wanted to do was to have pictures on a website. And they found that if they pretended to play the game, they just enough to get pictures on cards, they could have pictures on cards. And then the person was smart enough to say, aha, wait a minute, let's forget this game. Apparently, even to this day, and I think Flickr's still around, the website still talks about the monster and the card and rolling the dice or something. The code still talks about that internally because they never changed it. They thought they might go back to the game. Never went back to the game because sharing photos online was much more fun. And they
Right.
would never have found that out if they had believed the first questions, which were things like, how do I make my picture bigger? They would have been just trying to figure out how to make bigger cards in the game.
Yeah. And so these are all nice product tie-ins. What really excited me was the tie-in to Gojko's lizard optimization. But I
Yeah.
think the more generic thing is even beyond this, in sort of any communication we have with other people. A lot of times, the answering their question is a very transactional thing to do, and a very tempting things to do. But often understanding the context can lead to entirely different directions and whole new conversations and whole different relationships. So in the human sense, this habit is incredibly valuable. It's not limited to what you do with products, although it's still, and it can be very valuable there. So that's why I was excited about talking about this, and the fact that Descript annoyed us for several minutes was just
Icing on the cake.
contextually, exactly, contextually added a bit more energy to it for us.
There we go. Excellent. Well, listeners, I'll ask you a question. Well, what would you like us to talk about next time? Of course, we're going to be at the KitCon event in Helsinki. So if any of you are near Helsinki or want to go to Helsinki, Jeffrey, are there places still open?
There is, absolutely. We still have room available
Excellent.
and registrations open and hope to see people there.
This is KitCon, CITCON. If you go to CITCONF.com, you'll find out all about it. And this is the weekend after we're speaking. So this is 22nd to 23rd, if I remember right. Check the link in the show notes. And that's, of course, a place where you can come along and ask us lots of questions. And I'm almost certain going to record another episode of Troubleshooting Agile there. But if you would like to question my question, if you would like to not answer my question about what to do next, if you would like, for example, to argue with us and tell us we were wrong today, or that we should start something else, maybe we should start podcasting to aliens who live on other planets. I don't know. Whatever crazy stuff you want to talk to us about, we really like hearing from listeners. And the best way to find out about that is to go to agileconversations.com, where you'll find a copy of our book, and you will find free videos and free documents and information on running a conversational dojo and all kinds of other cool stuff. And lots of different ways to get in touch with us. Email is the oldest and greatest, but if somebody's invented telepathy with lizard people, then please use that. It's probably on our website. So get in touch with us any way that you'd like, and we'd sure like to use your ideas in a future podcast. Also, of course, another way to keep in touch is if you're not going to be in Helsinki, stop by next week when we'll have another episode of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.